I thought this week it would be a really great opportunity to break down iron's movement a little bit more in detail and go over a few things. I have a course in my school community where it's the fundamentals of iron's movement, and this is part of that. So I'm going to show you a little sneak peek, if you will, of what's offered inside. But my goal of this is to help break down why iron supplements, why iron infusions are such an issue, and why they really aren't solving anything that we want them to. So with that being said, let me share my screen with you, and that way it'll make things a little bit easier. All right. So we are going to discuss a few things today, and we are going to be talking about what iron supplements can do, the amount of iron that we need a day, some of the research around iron supplements, and go from there. So, iron supplements. One of the reasons why I'm not a huge fan of them is, one, because, our bodies don't need them, and they don't in the sense that we need 1 milligram of iron per day. And when we are consuming more iron than that, that's an issue because our body recycles 24. So a day, optimally, we have 25 milligrams of iron, and our body knows how to take in 1 milligram. If we are then giving our body a bolus of iron, then that can be an issue. I've tried to wrap my head around, I understand a little bit of like the logic where people are coming from when they're like, well, I have an issue absorbing iron, so the best solution is to just take more iron at once and help the body absorb it. If we did have an issue absorbing iron, then would it make sense to give the body a bolus of that? Even if it's not iron, if say we had an issue absorbing something else, like, a common one is B vitamins, but it makes sense to give the body a bolus of it. We don't pee it out. That's not where that's going. So it just doesn't make I can't quite wrap my head around the logic of it because I understand how we've kind of been fed that narrative, but it just doesn't really make sense to me. Anyways, so one of the issues with iron supplements is they tell the body to make more red blood cells, and that's a good thing. We want the body to make more red blood cells, but the issue is that it's doing it at such a significant pace that the body is not physiologically designed to keep up with that. So the spleen recycles blood every 120 days, and when we consume a heavy metal, it can move down to 20. So the significance of that is that we are asking the spleen to work 6 times as fast. And if that doesn't sound like a big deal to you, it's really hard to wrap our heads around just exactly how fast 6 times is. But if you went on a drive, and say that drive took you 3 hours to go from point A to point B, and then yours truly was waiting there for you, and when you arrived, I said that was great. How did that drive feel? And you're like, that was great. That was a fantastic drive. I love that drive. And I'm like, that's great. Guess what? You're going to turn around and you're going to do that drive in 30 minutes. You would tell me it's not possible. And I would agree. It is not possible to do that 3-hour drive in 30 minutes. And that is what we are asking the spleen to do. So that means we're going to end up with different accidents happening inside the body where it's not able to keep up. And that is a very big issue. So 6 times doesn't sound like a lot, but that's significant. Even if it was that it forced the spleen to work twice as fast, that would be hard. If you think of any time that you went on a run, if you had to do it 6 times as fast, it's really hard to comprehend the significance of that. Anyways, so that's part of the reason why, where it's making more red blood cells. That's why some people can see some relief, why they can start to feel better. but it'll last for about 6 weeks' time, and then it'll taper off. So we are trying to control a bodily function by forcing it to work 6 times as hard. That function in the body is doing that on its own, and we are trying to force the speed at which it works at, when really, if you think of a really common one is that somebody with low ferritin or low hemoglobin, they're going to say that they are fatigued really quick, that they have a hard time getting oxygen. Well, what if, just possibly, that the body is having low oxygen for a reason? Because if you have iron, oxygen, and water all interacting, then the body, if it doesn't have what it needs to move the iron, then it has to go to water and oxygen. And so what if it's trying to limit the amount of oxygen that the body is getting into our blood in order to help make sure that it's not resting? Something to think about. So when we force the spleen to work 6 times as fast, that's really stressful. And this is what we can look at as oxidative stress. So when we're thinking that there's something wrong with the body, it might just be that there's a misunderstanding that's going on. If we think that there's an issue with iron, maybe it's really an issue with iron's movement, and that's what I would argue is the case. If you think that an iron supplement is unique to cause this, then you'd be mistaken, because any heavy metal can be where it speeds up the red blood cell production. And we know this because 100 years ago, arsenic was used to prescribe anemia, and I would say it worked because iron began to rise. And that's also another question that we have to ask ourselves is, what are we defining as working? A lot of people think that, like, if my symptoms go away, then it means that it works. And again, I understand that. But iron is a heavy metal. And so a lot of people are really familiar with heavy metal detoxes. And part of the issue is that, if we're doing a heavy metal detox, I think most people would think that they're not going to feel super good afterwards. Well, if we have a lot of iron that's been stored in our tissues, then it can be the case where some people just don't feel super great once they get it moving and start getting it out, and it takes a little bit of time. And that can be because the body needs time to heal. And I think that's a really important distinction, is that in my perspective, our real goal for overall health and wellness should be that we are looking to heal the body and that we are looking to get to optimal. We are not looking to get to perfect. Because if we are looking to get to a point where we have no symptoms and the body isn't allowed to communicate with us, then that is going to be where we have lots of pharmaceutical medication, or we're just not going to be on Earth, because we are here in order to experience things. And part of that experience means that we have to learn. And with that means that we will have to have some kind of struggles in our lives. And I think that's important, because that struggle is going to help us learn what our body is communicating. And that's also going to be a mode that our body and us work together throughout our lives. So when we're thinking of iron's movement, it might take a little bit of time, and that's okay. We can get improvements, but the overall journey, I think, is important to keep in mind that the body needs time to heal. And so when I talk about how earlier on, how it could take, a 6-week interval, basically, that the body will go through when we take iron supplements, where it'll go up and then it'll come back down. And that has to do with a study in 1978 where they depleted vitamin A, and they found that iron levels rose a little bit when they took iron supplements, but they dropped back down. And then they found an 80% connection when they gave them vitamin A and the hemoglobin rising. So that's really, really significant, and part of the when I'm talking about, they'll work temporarily, that's what I mean, because most people think that works. Okay, so why iron needs to move. So we were going to talk about why iron needs to move and why that's important. I had recorded this video with, or this part with everything else, and then I came to find there was an issue with it. So we are re-recording it, and that's why I look slightly different than I did originally. So we've known for about 150 years that more iron doesn't move iron, and that came through when Dr. Theophilus Thomson, I'm sure I'm butchering his name, in 1855 discovered that cod liver oil could cure anemia. So that's significant that we've known for that long of time that more iron that's not the solution to anemia, and that there's whole food nutrients are going to be the bee's knees for that. So then if we're looking like back in time at 1934, when doctors Whipple, Minot, and Murphy, they won the Nobel Prize for curing B12 iron deficiency anemia, and they used beef liver at that time. So they both contain vitamin A, that's significant, and we can't look at them all as just individual things. We need to look at them as the whole picture, because there's way more going on with these whole food nutrients than, say, just consuming an iron supplement. And so that's important, because we know that iron relies on different nutrients, different enzymes, more than just iron itself. Dr. Maxwell Weintraub, he was a physician in the 50s at the University of Utah. And in the 40s, he wrote an article that we need 24.4 milligrams of iron daily. And so we've been trained that we need to just open up our mouths and consume more iron, and that's the solution, that you have a absorption issue, that you're just not absorbing it. I was working with a client the other day, and she was asking me about absorption. She's like, what if I'm not absorbing properly? And I said, well, that's a good thing. And she looked at me a little bit funny, but I said, if you're not absorbing things properly, we don't need to force nutrients into your body. That's not going to help anything, because your body would not be absorbing things as almost a defensive mechanism. And so I think it's a lot different, that instead of thinking that the body is broken, that we look at it as if the body needs to heal, because it knows way more than me. It knows way more than, I think we would be silly if we said that we can understand exactly why the body is doing things. And I think that when we switch our mind thought, or our train of thought, to that the body is doing things as a way to help us heal, rather than it's doing things because it's broken or there's some kind of issue, I think that that's really important. And so when we're thinking of why does iron need to move, well, why is it important, and how can we help the body heal, are really different trains of thought than thinking that, our bodies are out to get us to some extent. And so when we think of, making sure that we're not taking iron supplements, not having iron fortified foods, and even if it's not right now, if we've had them in the past, then that's still relevant. If you watch the video that I posted before this one, I talk about how long I think that it'll take me before my iron is regulated for what for how long it'll take in terms of blood donations and years for me to reach where I need to be for my age, based on the amount of iron supplements that I've taken, and based on birth control that I've taken. And I'm sure it's greater than that for the amount of time that it'll take, but those are just the two that I think that it'll take for me to catch up, and that's significant. So our iron recycling system is super important, and there's no magic pill that's going to fix that. It's simply not the case. A lot of people will struggle with beef liver. That's totally fine. The amount that you're taking is relevant. If you're taking the recommended amount, I dislike the recommended amount, because it has no relevancy to where you are starting on your journey. We are all starting at different levels of balance or imbalance, depending on how you want to look at it. And if we are just taking the recommended amount, then the recommended amount has nothing to do with us. I have some clients who don't do well if they take one beef liver capsule, and I have some clients who take 12. So everyone is going to be at different stages as to the amount to take. And so if we are thinking that, there's this magic pill, it's not going to be the case. So you might be thinking that you've tried beef liver or cod liver oil and you're still anemic. Again, they're not magic pills. I regularly get asked, well, why am I still anemic? I took the pills for like a month or two, and I still have a problem. Well, yeah, again, they're not magic pills. So, for example, like for the clients that are taking, like opening up the capsule of beef liver, sprinkling a little bit on their food, and then using that as a way to help get their body to adjust and heal, they're obviously going to need that to do that for a period of time until they can get up to an amount that their body isn't having a histamine reaction to, which has a large part to do with iron accumulating in the liver and not being able to deal with histamines. So that's important to think about, because that's going to impact how long we think about these things for, how long we think that we need to be focusing on helping our body heal for. And when, why iron needs to move? Well, iron's a heavy metal. And if it's not moving, then we know that iron rusts. We just don't think that it can happen inside of us, and it can. And that's really important to keep in mind that, when I first started out, I wanted to join a whole bunch of Facebook groups and see what people were saying so that I could understand, some words that people were using when they were describing their symptoms, to have a better idea of where people were coming from, that kind of a thing. In that pursuit, I got banned from a lot of Facebook groups, but it helped me understand ways to explain things that, and that's why I'm, explaining this the way that I am today. So iron can impact a variety of diseases and illnesses because it can accumulate in the cell, and that cell accumulation can be in the tissues and the organs. So again, a recent question that I had is, well, why does brain fog happen? Why does fatigue happen? And if we think of, the body likes to absorb iron, but we have so much iron that we have been exposed to that now it has an issue releasing that iron because we don't have enough copper and vitamin A and bioavailable copper and ceruloplasmin. All of those things have largely been disrupted, and so now we have an issue getting it out of the cell. So when we're thinking of that, thinking of iron rusting, if you think of our hormonal imbalances that, so many people think are the root of things, and they're simply not. Our minerals run the body, and then our hormones are based on that. And I say that because if you think of, our body can't make minerals, but it can make hormones. So it's going to use our hormones to get back to balance and to compensate for what we are lacking by way of minerals and enzymes and all that good stuff. So that's really important, because if you're thinking of having optimal health, you're thinking of hormonal balance, you're thinking of, having regulated moods, you're thinking of energy, hair growth, skin, feeling like your muscles are secure, like, you're healing well. All of those different things come back to iron. And so if we have our minerals that are dysregulated, and then we're adding other stressors on top of it, well, the body has to pick where it's going to give up something from if it doesn't have the energy, because it's trying to use the minerals that it does have to move the iron. So I think that's pretty significant when we think about it like that. Iron can accumulate in free form in body tissue under conditions of iron overload, which can cause excess iron, and that is a very, very big issue. So if we're thinking about how iron can impact things, autoimmunity, when we are talking about like endometriosis, is thought to be an autoimmune condition. As we age, we accumulate iron. And so that's important to think about for a second when you think about the amount of iron that we pump into our bodies. If we are struggling with like our fertility, well, if we don't have enough copper, then our body isn't going to be able to, either one, get pregnant or have a healthy pregnancy that gets us to where we want to go. Another thing is we can have mental health issues, we can have issues with our hormones, we can have issues with diabetes. All of these different things connect back to how iron's moving, and that's important, to say the least. So when I originally wrote this, I would say that I probably wrote this course maybe like a year and a bit ago. And when I was reading different books and looking at different experts, they were talking about how there's no physiological mechanism for excreting iron. And we know that that's not true for two reasons. One, we know that iron is regulated through blood loss, and that women naturally have a menstrual cycle, obviously, and that menstrual cycle helps us live longer because we are regulating iron through that blood loss. It's basically for the course of a year, our menstrual cycle equivalents to about one blood donation. That's important. Another important fact is that bile has a significant role when we're thinking of iron's movement as well. Bile is largely made up of cholesterol, and so when we are thinking of like stool and feces and bile and cholesterol, those all have a really intimate connection. And so iron can be regulated also through our feces. So when we're thinking of children, when we're thinking of pregnant women or elderly individuals or women and men, we're thinking of using stool as the mechanism for regulating iron, and that's really important. So while I'm a big fan of like blood donations or bloodletting, different things like that, because I think that that's really important. We have to take if you think of a boiling pot of water, and we have all this iron that's accumulating in the tissues, and the body's trying to find a way to communicate with us. If we take that lid off, then it can be really helpful. And so I think of bloodletting as a way of taking the lid off the boiling water to help the body breathe a little bit better. Okay. So, if you're anemic, I would say this is like within the last month or so, I am constantly asked, well, I'm anemic, and then what do I do? And my response is like, always go and read my free ebooks, start with some free content. If you want to work with me, then we can talk about it, but start there. And without fail, it's been that they have a low ferritin and that their hemoglobin is above 13. And I get confused with that. I am legitimately confused as to how this narrative exists, because I don't agree with a lot of the information that's talked about iron and things like that when we're looking at pamphlets that are handed out when people are going and getting their blood donation done. Some of it I think is just dated. But what I do find interesting is that they will test hemoglobin. They're not testing people's ferritin when you're going and donating blood to see whether or not you're eligible to donate blood. And you would think that if you're so low in iron that you wouldn't be allowed to donate blood. But they're testing your hemoglobin. And your hemoglobin for a woman should be 13, and for a man should be 14. So it just doesn't make any sense to me how, we could be saying, well, you're anemic and you need a blood infusion or an iron infusion, but if you wanted to, you could go and donate blood. This doesn't make any sense. So keep that in mind. It's really important when there's this, imbalance of how we're looking at things, that, iron overload exists. Probably, unless you have hemochromatosis or somebody that does, it's really not on your radar. But, iron overload can happen from multiple reasons. When we're thinking of like hereditary over the overabsorption of iron, we pass minerals down to our kids. So that can be part of it. Having too much iron in our diet, multiple iron infusions, if we are looking at, having iron fortified foods, that kind of a thing. So excessive iron, it can accumulate in various tissues. In ferritin, it's a tube-like protein that encases iron, which can prevent it from recycling. There's also 3 different forms of ferritin, which I'm sure, if you're being told that you're low in ferritin, you're not being told that there's 3 different forms. But once the ability to store iron is exceeded, then hemosiderin is released with tissue damage and damage to the recycling system. And Jim Moon talks about that in his book. So iron overload exists. In 1953, Walker and Arvidson, I want to say, they saw iron overload happening in South Africa because there were individuals that were brewing alcohol in iron pots. They were getting about 50 to 100 milligrams of iron per day from this. Again, Jim Moon talked about that, and that's really, really important. So you think of women who are taking these iron supplements and then they're having heavy menstrual cycles. Well, of course they are, because their body's trying to regulate the excess iron that they have in their tissues. Our menstrual cycle is good. I can remember being put on birth control when I was just little, I would say 13, and I was told that it was a good thing to stop my menstrual cycle, save the eggs and all of this other stuff, and that my cycle was this nuisance that we just really, if we could stop it, then that would be great. Our cycle is so important. It is one of the biggest blessings that we can have. And if our symptoms are making it so that it's unbearable and that we aren't able to enjoy our bleed, then that is the problem, not the bleed itself. So when we are thinking of irons most frequently damaged by iron overload, it can be the heart, it can be the liver, the pancreas, brain, and pituitary gland. And again, it's Jim Moon that talks about that. The issue is that when we are focusing on absorbing more iron, that we think that if we do more in the front end, then we absorb more iron, and that we assume that it'll be good for, a good thing, and it's not. I think a good example too is if you think of eating a cake, okay? So we can either take smaller bites and enjoy that cake over a longer period of time, or we can try and stretch our mouth out so that we can fit more of that cake in all at once. And that can be an issue because that's really not going to work long term, because we're going to have so much cake in our mouth that part of our digestive tract involves our mouth, and involves chewing, it involves breaking down food, and that's really the first part that we are going to introduce food at. If we are forcing more into that stage, that's not going to get us the optimal health that we're looking for. And so if we were to take small bites at once, when I'm talking about going low and slow and slowly increasing supplements so that your body can balance, it's like taking little nibbles at once, letting your body process it, going to the next. But trying to force the mouth to take on more is just not realistic. So, that can disrupt the microbiome. If you're thinking of like IBS, stomach issues, celiac, iron can accumulate in all these different places, and that can be it too. Okay, so the movement of iron. So let's talk about how things move and get into it a little bit more. I love this diagram because I think that it represents so much there's so much significance to it, I find. So one of the first places that iron can accumulate is our liver. Our liver is meant to be copper rich. Ideally, when we are born with more copper in our liver than one might expect. And it's a copper that sets our immunity up for the first 2 years of life. When we're thinking of iron, though, I mean, we can get iron infusions, thinking of cast iron pans, which, by the way, I'm not opposed to cast iron pans as long as they're well seasoned. I don't think that we need to like be fearful either of iron-rich foods, things like that. When things are naturally occurring, they're smarter than me. Naturally occurring things are much smarter than I am, for sure. And there's things that are going on that I know nothing about. But I do think that when we stick with naturally occurring things, that the body is going to be able to process them in a way that we have evolved with over time, and that is, more optimal for our health. We can also take iron supplements, or we can take synthetic supplements like prenatals and things like that. And copper is what gives us color. So that's why on the right side of your screen there, you're going to see color for all those different things. The world needs copper. We have a completely different experience with copper versus with iron. And we need both, but we have such an abundance of iron. And if you're listening to this and you've been told that you have low iron, that's going to be something that's hard to wrap your head around. But there's a lot of iron. There's a lot of iron. Okay, so the ceruloplasmin. So if you found me on TikTok, one of my videos, I would say that was like probably one of the more popular ones, was one of the first ones that I ever did. And I talked about ceruloplasmin being the bus that moves iron. And I want to clarify on that, because it is not the bus that moves iron, it's the bus that starts the process for iron's movement. So, for example, lactoferrin is really important, but it's activated by ceruloplasmin. So when I'm trying to describe this bus, and I mean, there's lots of moving parts, and it's complicated, and I'm doing my best to take something that's complex and break it down so that it's simple. Thinking of this is kind of like the activation. This is what is getting the body to get have it so that it can do what it needs to do. So one of the kind of like parts that I picture is when I'm thinking of ceruloplasmin and the bus, and say iron is able to get on each one of the doors. I picture being like Zootopia when all of those different sized animals are hopping off the SkyTrain. I picture that being like what ceruloplasmin is, where there's all of these little doors that pop up, and it's almost like again, this isn't like what's actually happening in the body, but kind of me trying to explain the process here, is those doors almost act as like kind of like portals, where now that that's activated, now iron can get going here, and these enzymes that are attached to that door and these proteins are ready to go. And then this other door has a role in these other things, and now those are ready to go. And it's what kickstarts it. So you have a baby blue bus, and cerulo means baby blue, and that is significant when we're thinking of color and copper and the body. Color means a lot. It has significance. And so we have this baby blue bus. There's 7 entrances, so our bodies are naturally designed to absorb iron, and there's 1 exit. And so we have people that are waiting to move. We have the master of keys, which is vitamin A in the form of retinol. So vitamin A makes sure that everybody is locked together. If we don't have enough vitamin A, then you might have enough ceruloplasmin, but you might not have copper that's able to be locked to it. And copper is the doorman, so he's going to control whether or not iron is going to be able to go to, get absorbed with lactoferrin and come out. All of those different things. So the significance of color. If you think of a healthy set of lungs, and you look at a smoker's lungs, and you can see that the smoker's lungs lack color, how do we know, based on those 2 images side by side, that we shouldn't smoke? I mean, realistically, we can't touch it, we can't taste it, we're not looking at it and going, or we're not doing anything other than looking at it to be able to know that there's a difference. So, how do we know? And it's intuitive that we know that we need copper. And copper is what gives us life. It what gives us color. When we're thinking of rainbows, it's copper. We can't touch, we can't taste, we can't smell the smoker's lungs, but we can tell just by looking at it that our organs are impacted by color. And that's a really important thing to think about, that there are that there's a significance to it. So what happens when iron can't move? This is going to be the last kind of phase that we go over. Again, there's more in the school community, so if you want, you can absolutely check that out. But iron's meant to be moving. So think of square dancers. They're constantly in movement and dancing around, and that's like iron and hemoglobin. So we want it to be in hemoglobin. 70% of the iron in the body is meant to be in hemoglobin. Its role is iron transportation, and it's there to help manage oxygen. So although we do need oxygen, it can be an issue if iron's not moving. And our bodies use oxygen and turn it into water and carbon dioxide. So there's a few issues with the low iron and anemia craze, and one is how we are trying to solve them. So, logically speaking, if you're low in something, you just take more of it. So if you're low in gas, you go and fill your car up with gas. But we have to ask ourselves, how are we measuring that low in gas? So lots of people are told to take an iron infusion from low ferritin. That doesn't make sense to me, because ferritin is only to account for less than 10% of the iron in the body. So if you're looking at where 10% of the iron is supposed to be, and it's not there, then would it really make sense that we need to boost up that 10%? Hemoglobin is meant to be the house of the iron. That's where 70% is. And again, there's 3 forms of ferritin. So there's the one that's tested, and there's also 2 other ones called heavy chain and light chain. And if you could take a guess at what they need, I'm sure you could probably guess now, they need copper. So not that we're thinking if iron is missing in the blood, then it's not in the body, and that just couldn't be further from the truth, because it can be in our tissues. And so when we're measuring iron in the blood and we're not seeing it there, again, part of the issue is the unit at what we're measuring it at, because we're only looking in the blood and expecting to see it there, and it can be in the tissues and the organs, and that's why it's not there. So even if you've been told that you have lack of iron, I would be willing to, I mean, if you're watching this video, then there's not some drastic measure that is happening that you are needing some kind of like iron infusion for, like that your spleen has ruptured and you're, projectile vomiting everywhere and spitting up blood and you're needing an iron infusion, or, something's happened, you've had like some kind of accident where there's been like extreme blood loss, things like that. A lot of women think that they're low in iron because of their menstrual cycle, and our menstrual cycle is our body trying to move the excess iron out of the body, because when we lose a lot of blood, our adrenal glands release a hormone called EPO, and that EPO is what all the doping scandals are about. EPO is going to tell the body to make more red blood cells, and it's also going to tell it to release the iron. And so when we have heavy blood loss, then our body's, it's trying to communicate and say, hey, I'm actually trying to get more iron out of the body. So copper is needed to manage iron and oxygen, it creates water. And that's, really quite important. When we're thinking of health concerns, it's likely coming from a lack of movement. There's a mineral imbalance, and iron can rust when it's not moving. We lose magnesium under stress. And magnesium, if you think of enzymes and minerals, enzymes are like a lock and minerals are a key. And magnesium is the key to just under 4,000 enzyme functions. And there's 9,000 functions in the body, so meaning magnesium is significant. So if we lose magnesium under stress, and the lack of iron's movement is stressful on the body, then you can imagine what's going on internally when you think about it that way. So this is kind of what I was explaining about there being different forms of ferritin. If you're thinking of, well, it's my iron's not in hemoglobin, well, if you're leaving your phone in the kitchen and you're looking for it in the bedroom, then you're not going to find it there. If we leave our iron in our tissues, it's not going to be where it should be. All right, so there's different issues that can arise when we don't have iron being loaded into ferritin properly. So I prefer to think of it like movers loading up a truck. If they have to lift something that's high into the truck, if they don't have the tools to do that, they might get the box that's like half out, it might be dented, there might be items that are broken, things not seated in the position. And then what happens to that truck when it's carrying those items? It becomes faulty. And this ferritin protein essentially turns into hemosiderin and, becomes a faulty ferritin, if you will. So as of 1972, Jacobs et al. In the British Journal of Medicine moved the spotlight from hemoglobin to ferritin. And now 50 years later, we are thinking that stored iron is good when the reality that high ferritin is not our friend. So part of the issue too is the range that we look at ferritin in. Ferritin is not meant to be in serum, it's meant to be in the cell. So when you're seeing it pop up in your blood, then that can be a sign that there's an issue. What's not meant to happen, it's not functioning properly. When ferritin is in the cell, it needs access to ferro-oxidase enzymes in order to load things properly. Only cellular ceruloplasmin can provide this. Okay, so animals deficient in copper have an increased amount of hemosiderin. Well, guess what? We are animals, and hemosiderin is something that we very much want to avoid. So when we have, this would mean that there's a low ferro-oxidase function, and that's an issue. Hemosiderin stores iron, and it basically throws away the key. So it's a iron carrier, and we wonder how iron gets stored to begin with in the tissue, and it's not in the blood, and that can be part of the process. Numerous studies have shown that animals fed iron supplemented diets have increased amounts of hemosiderin, and that's from one of my favorite men, Morley Robbins, and he obviously has spent many, many years compiling and combing through research for this. So when iron becomes stored in the tissues and something has gone wrong, largely when we have too much iron, not enough copper, and the body's trying to get it back in balance. So there's various forms of ferritin. An issue that can happen when we don't have light chain. If it doesn't have this iron, then it's not going to get loaded properly. And I think I've hit that home, so I don't think we need to keep going over that more. Part of the issue is that we want to know what current research is. And if we think that there's a new topic, that it has to be better because it's new, think of Ancel Keys with fats and oils. That was one of the most disastrous decisions for our health that took over 70 years to correct. And, I would say something that we're still going through now. So as of 1972, Jacobs et al., we still have, we're 50 years into it. So we still have 20 more before that narrative, really, I would say, comes into question. All right, let's see. What about this one here? Highs and lows of ferritin. So low ferritin can be a sign of needing more magnesium, more ceruloplasmin, more bioavailable copper, more B2, and that's really key for iron dynamic. I'm convinced that B vitamins have such a significant role with copper, and that's part of the reason why, so many people get hung up on the methylated B vitamins, and I wouldn't trust a synthetic B vitamin with anything. Whole food B vitamins are definitely where it's at. But if you're having low ferritin, then there could be parasites in your spleen. There can be a whole bunch of different things that are going on. But, whether or not and the low ferritin, I would say, is below 20. Just because there's signs of low ferritin doesn't mean that that it's the low ferritin that's the cause. And I think it's important to point out that there was a girl that used to go to the naturopath. She had high ferritin. She didn't take iron supplements. She would have a ferritin of 80 to 120. The doctor used to say that was amazing. And when she was pregnant, she taken 35 milligrams of iron, which we know is a month's worth. And if you were to ask her what some things that she struggled with were, she'd say depression, PTSD, Raynaud's, rashes, acne, and now her ferritin is in the 20s, and those issues are not issues that she deals with now, and I am she. So I think that's important to think of, just like we don't need huge storage levels of vitamin D, we don't need these huge amounts of ferritin in the body. And I also think it's important to point out that my iron, when I go and donate now, the ideal amount is 13 or 130, depending on what unit of measurement you're using. The first time I went and donated, my hemoglobin was at 170, and the lady just about fell out of the chair and said she'd never seen an iron that high in a female before. And I think that that's important to point out, because I am proof that you can get your iron more regulated, you can get it into hemoglobin, and start getting out of the body. And that's really, really key. So I hope you enjoyed this today. I hope this explained a few things for you. If you were going to look up any of the information that I discussed, I highly recommend looking at the Root Cause Protocol. Look up Jim Moon's Iron, the Most Toxic Metal. Like I said, E.D. Weinberg, The Hidden Dangers of Iron. There's another one, Dumping Iron by P.D. Mangan. That one's great. Morley Robbins has 2 books, Cure Your Fatigue. Those ones can be really good too if you're into reading books. And if you're looking for more information, if you're looking for something that's free, then head on down to the links down below. I have my free ebooks that you can click on for my link. And I also have my school community that you can go and take a peek at if you are wanting more on this course, which I give to anybody who joins. They get access to all of it. All right, I'll see you next week.